Hello, it's Melanie from Mel's Inky Fingers, and I'm here to share with you some tips and tricks for basic watercoloring of your stamped images. Now, this is by no means a comprehensive video. It's meant to be brief, just to share some basics about how I like to watercolor my images. Now, let's start with some of the supplies you're going to need when you are going to watercolor. I like to use Fluid 100 watercolor paper when I color my paper. This is a cotton paper. It is designed to hold water and allow you to work your color without your paper breaking down and the fibers peeling. You will also want a watercolor brush or some water painters. I like to use these water painters, but I like to use water on an outside water source instead of inside the barrel. You will also want ink, and any water-based ink is going to work from Stampin' Up. We have this in several forms. You can pull it off an ink pad. You can use a drop of an ink refill that is designed to re-ink your ink pads. And you can also use ink from a Stampin' Write marker. And I will show you how I prefer to pull these off when I'm working with ink. Now, you can also use some regular Stampin' Up cardstock. Just note that this is not designed to hold a lot of water. So if you do watercolor with regular cardstock, you want to remember not to use a lot of water on your images so that you don't break down your paper. It can, the fibers can peel up, it can curl and make it hard to put down on your project, and is just really meant for stamping with ink rather than water. Now, if you're using light amounts of water, this will also work okay. Of course, you're going to want a little bit of paper towel and then some water. Now, this little water tray that I'm using right here, this is actually a silicone mat that comes with this glass mat studio that I'm using. This is an awesome surface to watercolor on. You could also use a silicone craft mat, but you may also have some other items that you like to keep on hand. All right, so ink. Let's talk a little bit about how I like to get ink off my items to use. I love using an acrylic block and using this as my little ink palette. If I'm working on my glass mat studio, I also enjoy putting my ink directly on this. It's glass, it cleans really nicely and keeps your work surface nice and clean. So when using Stampin' Write markers, you can use the brush tip and you can actually scribble the ink right onto your acrylic block, and then you can use water and you can mix this and pick it up, and you will have, I don't know if you can really see that with the light, but you can color right onto your project. So Stampin' Write markers are fine if you want a very light layer of ink. Now, if you are using an ink refill, you're going to get a very concentrated drop of ink. You can put it on your block or you can put it on your glass mat. And again, you can add water to this. I always put my water off to the side and then pull my ink in, and then you have better control of how much color actually gets included in your water. So you can make it very light, or you can make it very dark and much more intense, depending on what you're going for with your look of your project. All right, my favorite way to pull ink for watercoloring is using my ink pad. And what I like to do is I like to open my ink pad. Some people like to squeeze it and put the ink on the lid and work off the lid. I like to keep my ink pads clean, and I put my acrylic block right into my ink pad, and I pull the ink off my pad, and then I work off my block like this. And the reason why I like this so much is the ink is stationary. It doesn't roll. It only pulls what you pull in. And so you can keep your project color light, or you can pull in a lot of it. and make it much more intense. So it gives you a lot of control over your color simply by pulling in more ink. But where you don't have water, the ink doesn't really move. It doesn't continue to bleed into the water that you added to your block. So it's a really nice way to control how much ink you use. When you're done, you can just wipe it off. I can just clean it with my chamois, and then my block is ready to go to either add a stamp or color with another ink color. So now that we have our method of getting ink on our project set, let's talk a little bit about working with images. When I'm watercoloring, I like to work with an embossed image if possible. Now, we don't always have an embossed image, and sometimes you don't need it because you're using what I call kind of a dry brush, in that you're going to pick up a little bit of color on your brush and add it to your image, but you're not going to really be working with water on your image, in which case you don't really have to have it embossed. But what I like about having an embossed image is it's kind of a cheater way to keep the water in a confined space and allows you to get a little more shading and depth to your image. So I cheat and I heat emboss my images. Usually I will use black or white. This is our WOW basic color pack of heat embossing powder. This comes with black, clear, and white. We also have a pack that's metallics that has gold, silver, and copper in it. Now I have an image here that is not heat embossed. This is just stamped, and I'm going to show you how you can do tone on tone color so that you can get a little more depth to your images. But let's talk about working with backgrounds a little bit first, because that's a nice place to start. If you don't have water painters, you can use a nice wide watercolor brush or paintbrush to add water to your background. And the amount of ink that you include on your paper, the intensity is going to vary based on whether you add water or don't add water. So let me show you an example of how that might look. So this is strawberry slush, and I'm going to bring it in on my block here. And I am going to wet my water painter. Now, again, if you don't have a water painter, you can use wide paintbrush, but I'm not going to add any water to this, but I am going to come over here and pick up some color, and I'm just going to add some stripes to my background. And you can see where my color lands is where my color stays. It doesn't really go anywhere. This is kind of like dry paper. It's just soaks right in and looks kind of defined. Now, if you first add some water to your paper, let me show you how that changes. So I'm going to take this and I'm just going to add some water to this paper before I add my color. Now I'm going to come and pick up my color, and now watch. See how the water the color bleeds a little bit? You get softer lines. It's not as harsh. It blends so that your color looks a little smoother. I'm hoping that the camera picks that up well for you. Whereas here, you can see that there's parts of the paper that the brush didn't touch because of the texture. It creates texture within the painting. Here, because we added the water first, it's soft, it's smooth, it gets in all the texture of the paper. It doesn't leave any of it uncolored. So depending on the look you're going for, you'll want to decide, do I want this to look smooth and even? If the answer is yes, I would add a base of water to your paper first. If you want the color to be a little more intense, a little more well-defined, you can wet your brush and add your color right to your watercolor paper before adding any water to it. All right. So hopefully that's neat. And this is a fun way to add background to your projects. I'm just going to finish this off since since I started it. Okay. Now I could go back up here and add some water to this. When you kind of hydrate the paper a little bit, this color will start to soften a little bit. But once it really gets in the paper and dries, it's not quite as easy to blend and move. But isn't that fun? It's a fun way to add color to a project. Another way you can add color to a project is by allowing the water to work the color for you. So I probably should have brought another piece of paper towel. I only have one. So I'm going to show you, I want a little bit of a darker color so that you can see this move. The paint will probably work just fine, but we're going to bring in a little bit of Azure Afternoon. This is kind of a medium toned blue. And I have like a medium size point on this brush. You could also use a medium point on a paintbrush. And I'm going to add some water. Say, for example, I wanted kind of like a polka dot background. I can add some water, and I added it a little bit heavy. I'm going to come in with my ink and just kind of dab it in the water. See how that water is kind of pulling the color for me right through this? Okay, so that water is going to move the ink for me. And now if I want to keep that color soft, I can dab it away. And then you have a nice soft little dot of color. You can even do that like if you wanted a full polka dot. Dab it away, and then you can see you have a little soft blotch of color. That's really soft because I didn't add much color. And then if you wanted to, you could always come back in, now that this is a little more dry, and add a little bit of shading by adding a little more intense color. If you want to, you can even blot that off once again. And you can see how letting that water carry your color gives you really nice gradient in your image. And you can do this on a stamped image. You could create a background by doing this, or just play a little bit on paper, and then you could save that and then use it to create little elements on projects down the road. All right, so now let's bring in some stamped images. Let's work on these a little bit. So when I color on an image, I tend to add water first to keep the color soft. I can always go back in and add more intensity to my color, just like I did here by coming in when it's a little more dry and adding a little bit of color. It gives me more flexibility. If you put it on dry and it's dark and it's hard to blend, you're kind of committing to a harsher look to your color, which may be what you want, but it also may not be what you want. So I always start out on the side of making my image a little softer and then come in with more intense color. So here's some Granny Apple Green. I'm going to use this to do my tulips. Then I'm going to bring it, or my tulip foliage, and I'm going to bring in some strawberry slush to do the tulips. So the first thing I'm going to do, this is kind of a small area, so I'm going to use a finer tipped brush. I'm going to come in and just add some water to these areas. And I'm going to add enough that it's going to help me blend this color, just like I did on that last little piece I showed you. So now I'm going to pick up some color and just kind of dab it in there. And I'm going to let that water move this color for me and just kind of see where it goes. Then I'll come in and help it a little bit if there's areas that I want darker or lighter. Then you can always dry off your brush and then kind of pull that color, and it's just a nice way to get some shading without much work. And now you can see how we have some shading to that. Hopefully that's being picked up on the camera. And now I'm going to come in and add a little bit of detail to give it some depth. I'm going to add some darker color here underneath this folded area, like it's a shadow. And the same right here. I want this to be like a shadow underneath here, so I'm going to come in and add a little bit of darker color. And the same right here. Now, if there's water when you're trying to add a shadow, it's going to dilute your color. So if you want your color a little more intense and you don't want it to bleed into that space there, you want to dab off that color first. So now we have a little bit of shading to our project, and it was easy. So now it makes it look like you really spent some time coloring it when you can see how easy it really was. So now I'm going to switch gears and show you a little bit of coloring these tulips. And I want white tulips with a little bit of pink accent. So I'm going to do something similar in that I'm going to add some water to my flowers. And I'm just kind of flicking my bristles up to add water. And then I'm going to come in with my strawberry slush and add it down here at the base. You can see how that's pulling that color right up into the flower by just dabbing it. So you really don't have to do much work. Just dab a little bit of color on there. Let the water do the work for you. I'm just kind of smoothing out the bottom of this with color. And if you need to come in and add a tiny bit more water in some areas to help your color blend a little bit, you can do that. But this is about all I'm going to do to this. I'm going to clean my brush. If you want to dab that off, you can, but I'm just going to let it dry. I have a little spot right here, actually, that I'm not really digging. So I'm just going to add a little water there, soften it. And now I'm just going to let that dry. And as long as the paper is wet, that color will continue to move. So if you have an area where you have a lot of water, you might want to dab it off a little bit so that your ink just doesn't continue to blend and then you wind up with no color variation. But that makes pretty tulips with just little pink accents. I'll come in and color the rest of this foliage so that it's all colored in. Now let's talk a little bit about this daisy over here. So I'm going to clean this off. I was debating if I just wanted to use pink, but I'm going to use blue. But let's start with these flower centers and how we can get some definition, because these are like a cone flower or a daisy. So you know those centers are really rounded, and we want to get some good detail, some depth to that. So I'm going to come in and add a fair amount of water to this center because I want the center of this flower to have color. So I'm just going to come in and dab the yellow on here. And I'm going to dry off that little dot that I splattered over there. And then I'm going to just soak up that excess water. And you can see now we have a really nice soft yellow base that we're going to work with. But I want some dimension created by my color. So I'm going to blot that off, come back in with not much water on my brush, and then I'm going to come in. There's some natural markings here that were given to us by the designer of the stamp. I always take full advantage of those, and I'm going to put my darkest color right on those creative markings. And now you can see how there's shading and how it gives a lot of depth to the center of that flower, and you can see how easy that was to actually do. Now I'm going to let these white. I want them to be white, but I'm going to add little blue flowers over here. So let me show you one way I would color these. Those are really small spaces. And so you don't really have a lot of ability to add depth. So what I do is I take a wet brush, I just kind of dab the water in all of them like this. I pick a section and work with it. And now I'm going to come in, pick up my blue, and just kind of dab it in that water. And part of it's going to be colored, part of it's going to be left without color. That's okay. I kind of want it, oops, that one I must have missed putting water on. So let's come in and add some water to that and help that ink out. So now we have just kind of partially covered colored flowers, but that's going to dry and it's going to look pretty. Some are light, some are dark. So you have some variation that has been created simply by how much ink was left on your brush. If you've got some harsh lines that you want blended, just come in and add a little dab of water. That will help blend those. And then you can come down here. I have enough ink and a little bit of water on my bristles of my brush since I don't have much color on here. These are going to be soft. You can always pick up a tiny bit more ink if you want more color to them. And that's as much as I would do to these little flowers. But you can see how they look masterfully colored, but they were done so simply. And then of course you can come in and start doing a little bit of work on the foliage. Now on the foliage, I'm going to color it all green, I think, and then come in and add some dark details. So let's pick up some Granny Apple Green on my acrylic block. And I'm going to pick up just a little bit and create kind of like a base layer here on my leaves. I want them all to be green. I don't want any of this to be left white this time. I'm just going to show you a little variation from this one over here. So now my leaves are wet, so I can come in with some green, add it to my leaves. Now those are all green. Now, if you want your stems to be green, you can do the same thing, but use a really fine paintbrush and add your layer of water. And then you're going to come in with water after the fact, or some ink after the fact. And I'm not going to worry about letting the water blend anything for me. I'm going to add the color myself. Because you have a small area, you want very good control over that. I just added enough water to allow me to blend that ink. So after you have painted your leaves, if you want to come in and add more detail, I'm going to have a dry brush and I'm just going to come in, and again, I'm going to use those creator markings that were provided to me by the artist who designed the stamp. I'm just going to come right in on top of that with my more intense ink and color the center of that, and then I'm going to just leave it like that. And again, that color will move a little bit until this is completely dry, but that's my image. I'm going to leave it like that, except that I see that I kind of missed a little blue flower, or else it's just, it looks like it's just really, really light. So I also sometimes just dip it right in the ink pad. Make sure it's wet. I don't want a lot of color on that little flower. There we go. I dabbed some blue on there. Now, one last thing, I'm going to show you how you can add depth to a colored cardstock. So let's set this aside and let's bring in our strawberry slush ink. And this is a small space, so I would probably pull in a fine tip paintbrush or my water painter. I'm going to get this wet and have the ink on here, and then I'm just going to kind of come in and give a little swipe and have it go in different directions. But I'm just adding tone on tone, and this is a way to very easily create detail on a solid colored cardstock. So hopefully, hopefully the camera is picking that up and you can see how there's tone on tone detail added to that. Very easy to do. You can see it's very quick, but you can do this with any color and it really does help elevate your projects. Each of these little techniques just adds another little element of interest to your project. And before you know it, you have really cool projects with a lot of depth and detail. So here are the images that we colored. Here are the background stripes that we created. This will make a fun piece to add to a project. Somehow I got some yellow splattered on there. Here's the piece to show some tone on tone color depth. So this is what we made together. And now when you put these elements on your projects, you're going to get projects that look like this. Beautifully watercolored projects with beautiful images. I hope you enjoyed seeing this.